was born in September of 1932, which was just 4 months before Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. My childhood was one of being living in a regime that was not particularly friendly to myself or anybody of my faith. I didn't know any different though. This is the way I grew up. There was a lake that I can remember going to with whoever would take me there, because I was a young tyke. And I would sit on the benches and I would feed the geese and the swans. And it was just a wonderful memory for me. And then when the Nuremberg laws were passed, I was not even 3 years old at the time, almost, but not quite. The benches said Jews cannot sit there. I was not allowed to be there. And I felt very much that something was taken away from me that I had before that I loved very much. I woke up on the morning of November 10, and my oldest brother, Asher, who was a very religious young man, had a habit of getting up in the morning early and going around the corner to the synagogue and opening up the doors for the early services. And that morning he did the same. He got up and he came running back and he said, "My God, the synagogue's on fire, the synagogue's on fire." And I was 6 years old. And we went to the Friedberger Anlage synagogue, and when we got there, sure enough, flames were spewing out of the windows. It was a building that was built out of steel, concrete, and stone, and it wasn't going to burn down anytime soon. But everything inside was burning. The pews were burning, the cushions were burning, the drapes were burning. And there were hoodlums going in and out with Molotov cocktails, trying to do as much damage as they could. There were policemen in the middle of the street. And we thought at first the policemen were there to protect the public. Not so. They were there to direct traffic away to make sure nobody got in the way of what was going on. And they were there to protect the hoodlums because they had a job to do. My father got up early that morning and took down the sign that was in front of our house, which said Herman Israel Hirsch. And incidentally, the Israel was not his middle name, but in 1933, when those laws were passed, they said that every Jewish man had to add Israel for a middle name, and every Jewish woman had to add Sarah for a middle name. So he had to have this sign in front of his house where his practice was, with the Star of David on it, which also he had to do, to let people know this is where a Jew lives. And so when he heard about what went on the night of Kristallnacht, he got up early that morning and took down the sign. And what he didn't realize was that the house was being watched, was being cased by 3 Gestapos. Later on, about 3-4 hours later, they came to the house to arrest my father. There were 2 soldiers, or they were at least in uniform, and they both had guns and they both had German police dogs. And the one in charge, he knocked on the door. My mother came to the door. She was holding my baby sister, who was 9 months old. And the man looked at her and he said, "I'm here to see Dr. Hirsch." And my mother, who was brought up never, ever to lie, had made an exception and said, "This is not a good thing." She looked at him straight in the face and said, "Dr. Hirsch is not here, but if you would leave your card, I will see to it that he calls you as soon as he comes in." Well, the man was not amused because he had been casing the house for 3-4 hours. He knew exactly who was in and who was out. So he grabbed my baby sister from my mother's arms, threw her to the floor, pulled out his pistol, pointed at the baby and said, "Now," to my mother, "you have 30 seconds for Dr. Hirsch to appear. If he doesn't come, I shoot the baby first." Then he pointed to my brother, "Werner, he's next." Then he pointed to me. And then he looks at my mother and says, "I will kill all 7 of your children by age, and then I will shoot you." My father, who was hiding in the half basement of the house, heard all this, ran out real quick and gave himself up. And from what I understand, he was taken to Buchenwald concentration camp. My mother, overnight, had changed her role, if you will, because she had been the caretaker of the family of 7 children and 2 adults. But now she had to be the decision maker as well, which was the role of my father, but he was no longer there. And she was most greatly concerned about the welfare of her children, and started doing research and found out that there were 6 Kindertransports leaving from Frankfurt, going to major cities in Europe. They were going 1 a month, and that children from the ages of 6 to 13 could apply and go. And she applied for all of us on all of them, on all 6 of them, and then found out that the younger children could not go. They were too young. But the first one was going to be leaving in December and was going to Paris. It turned out that my father had 2 brothers in Paris, and my mother had an aunt and cousins in Paris. So it seemed like the perfect place for us to go. So we were told then that we were going to be going to Paris. And I can imagine a 6-year-old boy being told he's going to Paris. It's like telling a 6-year-old kid here in the States that he's going to Disneyland. And I watched my mother. I can still remember, to this day, I can remember her packing my bags because I was too young to pack for myself. And each garment she put down, a tear from her face would come down on it, and she would then press the garment with her hand. And I would look at her and I would want to say, but I didn't, "Why are you sad, Mom? I'm going on this exciting adventure. Why are you sad? Why are you crying? I don't understand." And I never did understand. We got to Paris later that day. Everything that I thought was so exciting was not that exciting. It was one thing that I was being separated from my parents because I thought it was a short trip anyway. But then all of a sudden I was separated from my siblings. I was met there by someone I'd never seen before in my life. But they took me and Nathan and Helen Samuels. They had a 2-year-old daughter, and we got along famously. Ose homes were, it's Ordre de Secours des Enfants. It's an organization for the security of children, and they were put together for the purpose of taking care of children of German Jews who had been arrested and in some cases killed by the Germans, but had no place else to go. So these are orphanage for those kids. When I saw my brothers and we embraced and started sharing stories, and on the corner of my eye, I saw that there were hot food lines. There was a hot bread line on one side and a hot soup line on the other side. And I told them, I said I was happy to see them, but I hadn't had hot food in many months, because in Chateau de Majolier, when they served us, they served the food there, and then it was the survival of the fittest. And I was the scrawniest kid there, so I always ate when the food was cold. So here I had a chance for hot food. I went to the hot bread line, got my bread, went to the hot soup line, ate my bread while I was waiting for the soup. When I got the soup, I was out of bread. I went back into the hot bread line. By the time I got bread, I was out of soup. Went back and forth several times. And finally, I had had my fill. I'd had probably the best meal I'd had in years and years and years. And I thought everything was good with the world. That night I woke up and I had tremendous cramps. The pain, my stomach was awful. And they called in a medic. There was no doctor there. And he looked at me and he says that you have appendicitis and you're going to have to stay behind. You can't go on this escape convoy with everybody else. And so I had to stay behind. I waved my goodbye to my brothers, and I went to the next home, that Jose home in Chateau de Morel, where my two sisters were. And 3 months later, we got a communique saying that the first escape was very, very successful. They all got to New York. There were 100 kids without parents on the boat of 3,000 or so. They were going to try it exactly the same route, the same boat, everything exactly the same. And then my sisters and I were to get on some vehicle and get to Marseille and get going. And that we did. And we got to Marseille, and I saw the food lines, and I only went once to make sure that this would not happen again. And they also prepped us before we got on the train to go through the Pyrenees Mountains. And the last prep that they gave us was on how to handle ourselves vis-a-vis food. Because I said, when you go through Spain, Spain was neutral during World War II, but they were very much in line with the Nazis. And they allowed espionage, Nazi spies all over Spain. And so that we could not look like Jewish refugees. So what did that mean? So in response to that question, one of the man who was prepping us said, here's a sandwich. He told one of the boys, take this, what are you going to do with it? He said, the boy said, it's easy, I'll cut it in half, I'll eat half of it, put the other half in my pocket. Exactly what you can't do. Exactly what you cannot do. By doing that, you become a Jewish refugee, and everybody knows who you are, and you will be arrested and you'll be sent to a concentration camp. So we tried this over and over again, where they gave us a bag of food and said, eat all you want, but give the rest back. You can't save any. And so we did. We finally, after 4 or 5 tries, we got it right. We went through the mountains, and we stopped at every train station so we would get to Madrid at nighttime and not be seen. But the first train station we stopped at, we saw one of the more horrifying situations that I had in my young 8 years. Young kids were coming up to the train. They were starving. You could see their skulls through their faces. They were that hungry. And they were begging for food, and every one of us, to a man, reached in the pocket, and there was nothing there. And that was horrifying. That was one of the most horrifying things that I went through. I'd heard that the streets were paved with gold, and that there was a Franklin Roosevelt, who was the president, who rode around in his white horse, checking out on all of his subjects all the time. That was my vision of America. Once I got here, that I felt that at least there was a future here, because there was no future in any of Europe for anybody who was Jewish at that time. I was in about 4 or 5 foster homes growing up. In school, I had issues about being a Jew, a foreigner, and an alien, and a scrawny kid, and got my butt kicked more times than you can imagine. The things that my father and I had in common was that he was very artistically talented. So he was interested in my artistic abilities. And his favorite books, he had 2 volumes of Hans and Fritz, the hardcover volumes that he had in the dining room. And then if I behaved well during the meal, he and I would be able to go through things those are together. I have wonderful memories of that. It's impossible to fathom 6 million people being killed. What does it mean? You need to understand the importance of one life before you can even begin to think about 6 million.